Who are the top 5 rivals of the New York Rangers right here, right now, today? We debate on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 889 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, and today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with any order. You won't want to take off your Birddogs, we promise you. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, free and available on all platforms. And so today, it's just what it sounds like in the intro there. We're going to take a look at what I consider to be, obviously, a very subjective list, but what I consider to be the top 5 rivals of the New York Rangers right here, right now. Just going to run through the list from 5 to number 1, just kind of explain my reasoning and my thinking as far as why I rank all these teams where I did. I'd love to hear from you guys as well. Leave it in the comment section there on YouTube. Rank your top 5 New York Ranger rivals. I imagine there will be some crossover, but it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. I would imagine, everybody's top 5 lists will be a little bit different. And fair warning, there will be a little bit of recency bias here, but that's kind of the idea because we're ranking the top 5 New York Ranger rivals right here and right now. But we will obviously give some consideration to historical rivals, including the number 5 team on this list, and that's going to be the New York Islanders. Now, I realize a lot of people are going to hear this, and they're going to say, Islanders are number 1. Islanders are always be number 1. Islanders should never be anywhere but number 1. Totally hear you. Totally get it. Totally respect that point of view. For me, though, and for, Ranger fans who maybe didn't really get into the team until, the 90s or even a little bit later than that. We got some younger listeners. I don't think that this rivalry, even though it's there, it exists, and there's the proximity factor as well. You can walk from one arena to the other if you really wanted to. I don't think that it really resonates the way that some other rivalries do, because honestly, when's the last time that Rangers and Islanders really had just a knockdown, drag out of control game against each other? It hasn't really happened. I mean, it gets chippy now and then. You get a fight every once in a while, but there's nothing that's really been that out of control in really the last, I honestly want to say 30 years. I'm sure that, you go through the 30 years, you could pick out a game or two that got kind of crazy, but for the most part, this rivalry it's not what it once was. And again, this claims the number 5 spot mostly because of the historical aspect. Because I will say, obviously being a Ranger fan and hearing some of you guys even talk about this rivalry, it's one that has always been there. And it's one where at times it's been just completely insane. If you go on YouTube and type in Rangers Islanders Brawl, let me just give you the titles of the first six videos that pop up when you type in Rangers Islanders Brawl into the YouTube search bar. This is what you get. Rangers versus Islanders, April 4, 1998. That one, isn't too descriptive, but the thumbnail for that video is a picture of Dan Cloutier and Tommy Salo, both goalies, fighting each other. So you get that. You also get Islanders versus Rangers post-game brawl, April 5, 1990. Rangers versus Islanders brawl, October 2, 1995. Islanders versus Rangers, February 17, 1985. NHL, October 2, 1981. New York Rangers versus New York Islanders, bench clearing brawl. And then we actually get kind of a modern one. Islanders, Rangers have 2 fights in opening 2.5 minutes. That one was from just a couple of years ago. And then finally, Islanders, Rangers, rough stuff, 4/5/90, April 5th, 1990. So obviously, again, a lot of crazy moments in this rivalry. I went back and watched some of the videos, and it's probably for the better that the NHL does have such strict punishments for bench clearing brawls. The coach gets suspended for a whole boatload of games. The first player over the boards to jump onto the ice, he gets suspended. I haven't looked up the rule in a long time, but I know it's a very lengthy suspension. I want to say 20 games for each, give or take. And again, it's this rivalry hasn't been at that level in recent seasons. One thing that I always talk about with Gil Martin on Locked On Islanders, because we do our crossover episodes, it's been forever since they've even had a playoff matchup. 1994 was the last time that it happened. So even if it happens this year, it's still 30 years. So for all those reasons, I can't go any higher than number 5. Again, I appreciate the people that will always tell me that this has to be number 1. Totally respect that opinion, totally get it. But for me, it's just not. And I think, for Ranger fans, once again, that got into this team within the last 30 years, certainly the last 20 years or so, it just doesn't resonate the way some other rivalries do. And again, part of that too is that no playoff matchups, and it feels like these teams are never good at the same time. And so for all those reasons, the Islanders are going to be number 5 on this list. The other thing that I want to do as part of our countdown here, we're going to be doing this all 5 entries, is I'm going to take a look at what I consider to be the worst moment of each of these rivalries, for Ranger fans, the really painful memories, as well as the best moment. And naturally, we'll do the worst moment first. I think for Ranger fans, and I can't really relate to this one because I was not born yet, but I think the worst moment for Ranger fans in this rivalry had to have been the end of the 1983 Stanley Cup Final, because that is when the Islanders won their 4th consecutive Stanley Cup. Again, I did not live through this. I did not experience it. I can only appreciate it in a historical context. But I have to imagine any Ranger fan that was around back then, and that's when this rivalry was pretty much at its peak, or near its peak at least, and you're watching the New York Islanders win their 4th straight Stanley Cup. You have to go through 4 consecutive years of this. And again, if I had been around for this, maybe I'd feel differently. Maybe the Islanders would rank higher on this list, but that had to be absolutely miserable. As far as a modern day example, I can't really think of anything that really stands out as far as a worst moment. I mean, I don't know. The Islanders have kind of had the Rangers number mostly in recent seasons. That's mildly annoying, but there's nothing that's really going to stick in my craw and keep me up every single night. As far as the best moment, I got to go with the 1994 sweep in the first round of the playoffs, when you consider it's Rangers Islanders. So you got the rivalry aspect. It wasn't too far removed from the Islanders winning 4 straight Stanley Cups. So it had to be really nice for Ranger fans to see the Rangers finally just not only beat the Islanders in the playoffs, but just completely dominate them. It was a 4-game sweep. The scores were 6-0, 6-0, 5-1, and 5-2, a combined score of 22-3. You might never see a playoff series dominated to that degree ever again. I mean, to begin with, sweeps don't happen as often as they used to. I mean, I maybe there was one this past year. Was there even one this past year in the playoffs? I'd have to look back to know for sure. But yeah, man, just complete domination had to be a fun moment for Ranger fans to finally knock off the Islanders there, and obviously leads to the Rangers winning the Stanley Cup. We're going to keep everything rolling. In just a second, I want to shift our attention to the number 4 greatest rival for the New York Rangers right here and right now. It is a team, another Metro Division team. And for right now, I'll just leave it at that. We'll reveal who that is in just a second. But first, got to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs make you look good. Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Birddog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Birddogs fixed the issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice any movement. Birddogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with your order. That is birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take off your bird dogs. We promise you. All right, we just want to go ahead and thank everybody, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. All right, so on to number 4 here. I'm going to go, like I said, with another Metro Division team, and it's going to be the Carolina Hurricanes. And I mentioned there's going to be some recency bias here. This is a good example of that. We go from a historic Ranger rival in the Islanders to kind of a modern-day rival in the Carolina Hurricanes. The Canes, it feels like not even just for the Rangers, but really for the entire Metro Division, but certainly for the Rangers, they're kind of the final boss, right? This is such a tough division. We talk about it, over and over, how difficult it is, how tough it is to finish in the top 4, or maybe in some cases the top 5 and work your way into the playoffs. Not easy. There's no layups in this division. Even the Flyers and Blue Jackets will tend to give you a good game, and who knows, maybe one of those teams will improve this upcoming season. But the Canes, they're the team that's kind of ruled the roost in this division. They've won the division 3 straight years, and it's one of those situations where it feels like the Rangers, if they're going to win a Stanley Cup, or if they're going to at least make it to the Stanley Cup Finals, it feels like the Canes are always going to be in their way. This is a hurdle that the Rangers are always going to have to clear. They're always going to be right in the mix. They're always going to be one of the better teams. Even if they don't win the division, got to figure they'll be in the playoffs. And you got to figure that the Rangers will probably have to beat them, especially the way the playoffs are formatted now, where they kind of section off the divisions. Sooner or later, the Rangers going to have to overcome the Carolina Hurricanes if they are going to, ultimately win a Stanley Cup. And, that's been the case in recent seasons. 2 years ago, the Rangers and Canes meet in the second round. Just that crazy 7-game series. The home team won every game except for Game 7, where the Rangers went on the road and won. So that obviously adds to the rivalry as well. And then even this past year, I realized the Rangers obviously lost to the Devils, unfortunately. But had they beaten the Devils, well, there were the Carolina Hurricanes. They were waiting for them right there in round 2. So, yeah, man, I mean, the Canes, they're just that big hurdle that you're always going to have to clear if you're a team in this Metro division, whether it comes to actually winning the division, or even if you don't win the division, eventually meeting them in the playoffs. And, the one line for the Carolina Hurricanes, this is a line that I feel like has hurt the Rangers about as much or more than any line really in recent history, not all time, but certainly in recent history. You got Aho, Svechnikov, Teravainen. Aho always kills the Rangers, and Svechnikov is always, kind of towing the line, shall we say. I wouldn't go so far as to label him a dirty player, but he's always mixing it up and, trying to basically see how much he can get away with. So you got that dynamic as well. And I think just the fact that so many players have sort of, quote unquote, switched sides in this rivalry in recent seasons, more so with Rangers going to the Canes, but we have seen some Canes go to the Rangers. Obviously, Vincent Trocheck, a great recent example of that. And now the Rangers adding Eric Gustafsson in this offseason, or yeah, I believe Gustafsson's played for a million teams. Off the top of my head, I believe he played for the Canes. I could be wrong about that. But every former Ranger, it feels like they eventually, for a while, every former Ranger was going to the Lightning, and now they all go to the Canes, whether it's, Stepan, Ronta, Brendan Smith, Brady Shea is there, obviously. Tony DeAngelo was there, left, and is now there again. So the list goes on and on. So you got that dynamic work in the favor as well. The fact that a lot of players seem to have played for both teams. And as far as the worst moment in this rivalry, I'm going to have to go with the bubble playoffs from a few years back. The Rangers, to kind of give everybody a little bit of a refresher of what was just a very strange and kind of sad situation, because obviously, the pandemic is what caused that, and just a rough time for basically the entire planet. I mean, let's just call it like it is here. But you get those COVID playoffs, 24 teams are in the tournament. The Rangers were the 11 seed that year. The Canes were the 6 seed, and the qualifying round was a best of 5, and the Rangers were swept out of the playoffs in just 3 games by the Canes. They were the only team to get swept that year, even with the best of 5 format. So that was unfortunate. But to really kind of hone in on just a really just rough, tough to swallow moment from that series, I'm just going to say Game 2. If you guys remember, this is when Lundqvist, Georgiev, and Igor Shesterkin were all on the Ranger roster. Obviously, one of them was a healthy scratch on any given night. And Igor was hurt going into the playoffs that year. And so there was kind of this, okay, well, who's going to be the starting goalie? The Rangers end up going, obviously, with Henrik Lundqvist for games 1 and 2. Igor was then healthy enough to play game 3, but the Rangers lost all 3 games. But game 2 specifically, we didn't know it at the time. I think a lot of us figured that Lundqvist might be bought out in the offseason, but that turned out to be Henrik Lundqvist's final game, and he loses to the Canes, 4-1 final. It happens in Toronto, in an empty arena, with no fans, you cannot have a more anticlimactic conclusion to just a legendary career than what we saw that day with Henrik Lundqvist and, the New York Rangers just playing in the bubble and losing to a Canes team that, quite frankly, was just quite a bit better than the Rangers at the time. It was a little bit of a mismatch and just really unfortunate. Again, we didn't know at the time that it would be Hank's last game, but that's how it turned out. And just kind of a bummer looking back that that's the way that it ended for Henrik Lundqvist. Obviously, still a legendary career and his numbers in the rafters and all that good stuff. But rough way to go out there. As far as a best moment in this rivalry for the Ranger fans, I thought about going with Game 7 last year because obviously the Rangers go on the road, post a very impressive win, buck the trend of the home team winning every single game in that series, that would be the easy one. Rangers dominated that game. You got goals from Fox, Kreider, Strome, Kreider again, Hedel, and Kopp. Igor was doing Igor things in that game. But I'm actually going to go to what I thought was kind of the turning point of that series, and that was game 3. The Rangers were down 2-0 after losing both games on the road. Goes back to the Garden, so you got to get this one. I mean, never say never, but you don't want to be falling down 3-0. And just a game where the Rangers put their best foot forward. They play with the kind of desperation that you would expect out of a team that's down 2-0. And at the end of that game, this is the exact moment. You had, for no real reason, Max Domi basically attacking Ryan Lindgren. The whistle or the horn blew and the game was over. And Lindgren had the puck and was just kind of skating out the rest of the time. And Domi confronted him, kind of cross-checked him. And I don't know what he was doing. I don't know what his problem was. But Lindgren at that point said, okay, you want to do this? We're doing this. And he threw his glove down. And, he was fighting Domi there at the end. And you also had an altercation between Gerard Gallant and Tony DeAngelo. DeAngelo was yelling at Gallant for something. I mean, who knows? Maybe because Reeves was on the ice. But even Ranger fans that don't like Gerard Gallant, didn't think he was the right coach for this job, I got to imagine you at least like that moment, him going back and forth with Tony DeAngelo there. And I said at the time, right when it happened, I thought the Canes really made a mistake by not just skating off the ice at that point. You're still up 2-1. You're still in the driver's seat. I feel like maybe that lit a fire under the Rangers. Not that they needed extra motivation because it is the Stanley Cup playoffs, but I thought that was kind of a tactical mistake by the Canes, and just a great job by the Rangers there, playing with intensity and saying the message that, look, you guys aren't going to push us around, and we're right in this series, and we're going to come back and win it. And that's exactly what they did. So good stuff all around there. To move on to number 3, the number 3 current best rival of the New York Rangers, I'm going to go with the Washington Capitals. In terms of just physicality and nastiness, and basically knowing going into every single game that it is going to be an absolute knockdown, drag-out battle on the ice. I don't know if there's a team that fits that description for the Rangers any better than the Washington Capitals. And I realize I have them at number 3 here. We're going to go into 2 other teams, in addition to the Capitals here that I have ranked higher than the Capitals. But even with those other 2 teams, I won't reveal them. You guys can probably figure it out. But with those 2 teams, it's possible for the Rangers and those 2 teams to play a game against each other without fisticuffs. I mean, it probably won't happen, but it's at least possible. With the Rangers and Capitals right now, I feel like you cannot get through a game with these 2 teams without nastiness and snarl, maybe some borderline dirty plays, some fighting, some trash talk, the whole 9 yards. Right now, Rangers Capitals, it kind of takes the cake in that department. And I think you also got to acknowledge here the Laviolette factor. As we've mentioned in the past, long before Laviolette ever became the coach of the New York Rangers, his teams tend to toe the line. I used that phrase a little bit earlier, but I mean, they play with some serious edge, some serious snarl, and Laviolette is just not going to let his team lose the physical battle or lose the intimidation battle. And ever since he's been the coach of that team, I mean, Rangers Capitals has been a rivalry for a long time. You can go back about 15 years now, or maybe even longer if you really want to. But it's really kicked up a notch in intensity the last handful of years. And I think that kind of coincides with Laviolette becoming their head coach. Obviously, we had the whole Tom Wilson situation a few years ago. I don't need to rehash that whole thing. You guys know what happened. He ragdolls Panarin. And then, as fate would have it, Rangers and Capitals are playing each other. What was it, like 2 nights later? And it was fight night. There were 7 or 8 fights and just all kinds of craziness, guys spearing each other, just completely out of control. So, you've also had last year, if you want a more recent example, there was a situation where TJ Oshie boarded Ryan Lindgren, hit him from behind. And I think Lindgren left that game briefly. And then Barclay Goodrow is fighting TJ Oshie on the very next shift. So it's nasty. Something else that I think really adds to this rivalry, all the playoff matchups and the fact that each of these 2 teams within the past, let's see, doing some quick math here, that's be about 15 or 16 years, both teams have erased a 3-1 series deficit to come back and win the series. The Capitals did it to the Rangers back in 2008, 2009 in the first round. Caps were the 2 seed. Rangers were the 7 seed. Rangers got up 3-1 in that series. Unfortunately, the Capitals won 3 consecutive games. And then in 2014, 2015, much nicer moment. The Rangers come back from 3-1 down to defeat the Capitals. So you had the crazy comeback win in Game 5. Rangers about to be eliminated. Kreider ties the game with less than 2 minutes left. And then Ryan McDonough wins it in overtime. Rangers hold off the Caps in Game 6, and then they win Game 7 in overtime, 2-1 on the goal by Derek Stepan. We just did a whole episode on that, the Derek Stepan stories of him scoring that Game 7 overtime winner. But yeah, they've played each other a million times in the playoffs, and yeah, I mean, it's just a great rivalry. And a rivalry that's really ratcheted up in intensity in recent seasons as well. As far as the worst moment in this rivalry, I mean, I kind of gave it away a minute ago, but we'll go into greater detail here. I would say 2008-2009 Stanley Cup playoffs Game 7, the clock just running out on that game and on the Ranger season. What happened, it was 1-1. Both teams scored somewhat early. I believe both were in the first period. Nick Antropov, a rental for the Rangers that year, scored to make it 1-0. And then Alex Semin, he scored to tie it, made it 1-1. It stayed 1-1 for a very long time. And then Washington Capitals legend Sergei Fedorov was actually the guy who scored the game-winning goal with 4:59 to go in the third period. And obviously that's a rough blow at a tough time in the game, but there are still 5 minutes left. You have some hope, but that was the worst, most miserable 5 minutes I've ever seen. You never give up hope because you know you're just one opportunity away. I'm not even sure the Rangers got a shot on goal in the last 5 minutes. I remember the Capitals just dominating possession. It was in Washington. Rangers are on the road. That place was going crazy, and the Rangers just could not even begin to set up an opportunity. And a fun fact, that was the final goal of Sergei Fedorov's career because that was his last season. And I looked at his stats, and that year in the playoffs, he only had 1 goal. So obviously that was it. The final goal, Sergei Fedorov, playing with the Washington Capitals and eliminating the New York Rangers. As far as the best moment in this rivalry, as far as Ranger fans are concerned, at least, Derek Stepan, completing the 3-1 comeback. I really don't think you can go with anything other than this. I mean, obviously there have been some great moments over the years. There was one year where the Rangers and Capitals played in the first round. The home team won every game except for Game 7. Rangers went in and beat the Capitals 5-0. So I thought about that, but yeah, Derek Stepan scoring in overtime, Game 7. It's just very, very difficult to top that. And so I think I got to go with that. The Rangers win the faceoff. You've got Keith Yandel making a pass, that the shot from McDonough or Girardi. I always get it mixed up. You guys can help me out here. I don't have it in front of me right now, but one of them took a shot, save made. Derek Stepan gets to the rebound and just buries it, and everybody goes crazy. The Rangers win the game. And as I mentioned, we just did an entire episode about that moment where you guys shared your stories. That was a ton of fun, but just a wonderful moment for the Rangers. And if you're a Ranger fan, probably the best moment in the history of this rivalry between the Rangers and the Capitals. So number 3, Washington Capitals. We're get to number 2 and then number 1 in just a second here. All right, so number 2 rivalry of the New York Rangers. I'm going to go with the New Jersey Devils, and this one has kind of been reignited in recent seasons. It was huge in the 90s. Obviously, both teams were very good, and who could forget the 1994 Eastern Conference Final? It was very nasty back then as well. Just like with the Islanders, you've got the proximity thing going on, not too far from here to the Prudential Center. So you've got that. And like I said, it's picked back up in recent seasons because, for a while there, it kind of was dormant. Neither team was, both teams had their moments, but it kind of like the Islanders, it felt like for years, the Rangers and Devils were never really all that good at the same time. 2012, they met in the conference final, but then the Devils fell off for a little while, and it's taken them a while to kind of put the pieces back together. And like I said, this past season, the one that just happened, first one in a while, where both the Rangers and Devils had very good seasons. And of course, they met in the playoffs. Both teams endured a recent rebuild, so you've kind of got that symmetry going on where they're both teams putting the pieces back together and have a nice mix. Both teams do of homegrown talent, guys that came in via free agency, guys that they drafted as well. And when you consider the fact that both teams are relatively young, I know the Rangers, average age has gone up quite a bit, but that's mostly with, fourth liners and the backup goalie and all that. The core is still relatively young. So I get the feeling that this rivalry is going to be pretty much on fire for the next few seasons going forward. Wouldn't be surprised at all if these two teams meet in the playoffs again. And again, this past playoff series, the one that just occurred this past season, obviously Rangers didn't get the result, and it was pretty much a disaster after the first 2 games. But I feel like it kind of poured gasoline back on the fire. And as far as fan bases going back and forth, this one might take the cake. I mean, it's got, I'm going to spoil number 1 right now, but I think you guys know what it is. It might not quite be at the level as far as the Rangers and the Penguins fan base, but it's pretty close. Rangers and Devils fans, they go back and forth on social media quite a bit. And again, you've got that proximity factor going on. There's always going to be a few Devil fans in Madison Square Garden anytime the Rangers play the Devils. And there's always going to be a lot of New York Ranger fans anytime these two teams play each other at the Prudential Center. So you've got that. The Sean Avery, Martin Brodeur stuff. I mean, what do I even say about this? I could do an entire episode probably about this one-on-one rivalry and all the over-the-top antics of Sean Avery, just doing everything he could to get under Brodeur's skin. Those two going back and forth physically, verbally, throughout the years that Sean Avery was a member of the New York Rangers. You've got the, if you want to go back to 2012, you had that line fight to start the game. Both fourth lines on the ice and the puck drops and everybody's fighting each other. Basically a 3-on-3 brawl. You had, John Tortorella and Peter DeBoer used to go back and forth quite a bit. A lot of unpleasantries exchanged between the two of them. They played each other in the Eastern Conference Final, and obviously the Rangers didn't get the result they were looking for back in 2012. And then, I already mentioned the Sean Avery antics, but that was, I believe, 2008 in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Rangers eliminate the Devils in 5 games. You've got the infamous Sean Avery post-game interview where he's talking about Martin Brodeur, and you guys can look that up if you want. I don't really want to repeat what he says because I don't want to get in trouble. But as far as, looking at the worst moment of this series and then the best moment of this series, the rivalry, I would say for worst moment, I thought about giving it to this past season because it's kind of fresh in everybody's heads. And I think Ranger fans, we all really talked ourselves into this team and believing that they could go on a run and potentially win the Stanley Cup. On paper, you would think they had a more talented team this past year than they did 2 years ago when they made it to the conference final, but it just didn't work out. They win the first 2 games, and the Devils come storming back to ultimately win the series. But the reason I didn't go with this past year is because it was only the first round, so there's no guarantees how far the Rangers would have gone, if they had eliminated the Devils. I think I got to go with, and not to rehash some bad memories and something that we haven't talked about in a long time, but I think I would have to go with Adam Henrique, overtime, Game 6 in 2012. That was once again the Eastern Conference Final as opposed to just the first round. So, man, I mean, you make it to the Eastern Conference Final, you're close. You can taste the Stanley Cup. You're right there. You're one of the last 4 teams standing, and to see the Rangers lose in overtime in that game, that was obviously very rough. Kind of a scramble in front of the Ranger net, and Adam Henrique somehow puts it into the net. Rangers had the best record in the Eastern Conference that year, so that kind of made it even worse. You felt that was a Stanley Cup contending team, and just unfortunate that they couldn't get to the finals. As far as best moment in this rivalry, I mean, come on. Do I even have to say it? Do I even have to explain it? Stephane Matteau, Game 7. I'm actually going to do an honorable mention here because this one is just so obvious. Stephane Matteau, double overtime. I think maybe the greatest series in the history of professional sports. Rangers and Devils, 1994 Eastern Conference Final, just back and forth the entire way. Matteau actually won, I believe it was Game 3 in overtime earlier in this series. The Rangers go down 3-2. Mark Messier guarantees a victory in Game 6 on the road. Rangers go down 2-0 in that game. Kovalev scores. Messier natural hat trick. We force a Game 7. Brian Leetch scores in Game 7. The Devils score with 7 seconds remaining to send it into overtime and ultimately double overtime. And then you've got Stephane Matteau, just a great hustle play around behind the net, swings it in front and scores. I basically just borrowed Howie Rose's call there. And yeah, everybody goes crazy. The Rangers go to the Stanley Cup final and they eventually knock off the Vancouver Canucks. But just a fantastic moment, an iconic call. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then chances are you're one of the newer, younger Ranger fans, and that's all good. It's all cool. But do yourself a favor and go to YouTube and just type in Matteau, Matteau, Matteau. That's all you need. There's nothing else that'll come up. You'll see the goal that I'm talking about here. Once again, a double overtime Game 7 winner that vaulted the Rangers to the Stanley Cup final and allowed them to end the curse. And like I said, there's nothing else that could go here as far as best moment in this rivalry. There's almost no chance that it will ever be topped. I mean, they can't meet each other unless the Rangers and Devils play each other in the Eastern Conference final and it goes into triple overtime and the Rangers win that. It's literally impossible to beat this. It's as deep into the season and as big of a game as you could have between these two teams. Obviously, they can't meet each other in the finals. So, yeah, that's it literally cannot be topped unless, like I said, Game 7, triple overtime, the Rangers beating the Devils in the Eastern Conference final. That'd be the only way. As far as an honorable mention here, I did want to go with a second one here because, like I said, the Matteau one is just so obvious. So I'm going to go with the other time that the Rangers eliminated the Devils in the playoffs on a wraparound goal in overtime. This one happened in 1997, second round of the playoffs, game 5 in New Jersey. The Rangers, 14:08 into overtime. Adam Graves scores on a wraparound goal. You got Mark Messier. He's got the puck in the Rangers' zone. Bit of a dangerous pass from Mess on this. He made a backhand pass in front of the Ranger net, kind of across the goal crease. It's a dangerous pass, but I guess it is Messier, and you trust that he knows what he's doing. But he made a backhand pass to Jeff Courtnall, who I believe was only on the Rangers for one season. Courtnall gains the blue line up the right side, dumps it around behind the net. Adam Graves wins a 50-50 puck, comes in front, scores the goal, and the Rangers win, eliminate the Devils, and head to the Eastern Conference Final. Unfortunately, they did lose to the Flyers in that round. But yeah, that's number 2. And then number 1, there should be no surprise at this point. In fact, I already kind of spoiled it, but there was no way to avoid it. Yeah, it's the Pittsburgh Penguins. And again, I know there might be some differing opinions. There might be some people that want the Islanders here. To me, and I think for Ranger fans who've gotten this team in the last 20 years, the last 30 years, to me, it can't be any team other than the Pittsburgh Penguins. There's players on the Penguins that you just don't like as a Ranger fan. I think for sure, Crosby and Malkin definitely come to mind. You could probably throw Letang in there as well. With the Islanders, I mean, which players on the Islanders in the last 10 or 20 years do you like? You look at this guy, man, I can't stand this guy. One for me that I've never really liked is Cal Clutterbuck, because I feel like he always kind of picks on non-fighters on the Rangers and then kind of shies away when Ryan Reeves is getting in his face. But he's not like a superstar player or anything like that. He's not like an iconic player. So to me, that's part of the reason you've got the 2 iconic players in the Penguins, Crosby and Malkin, who spend just as much time whining as they do putting up, unbelievable seasons and unbelievable numbers. So you've got that factor. And we've had just some incredible playoff battles between these 2 teams in recent seasons. Twice now, the Rangers have come back from 3 games to 1 down to beat the Penguins in a playoff series. So that's obviously been very, very enjoyable. I will say, though, as much as as a Ranger fan, you're not very fond of Crosby and Malkin. And I've said this in the past. I've even talked about this with Hunter Hodes of Locked On Penguins. He does an awesome job with his show. I don't really want to see Crosby and Malkin and even Letang retire into this rivalry. They become such a part of it. And to me, when the Rangers are playing the Penguins, it kind of starts there. It's like, okay, how do we slow those guys down? How do we beat them? I don't ever want to see them out of the lineup. First of all, I never want to see anybody get hurt. But, 2 years ago when the Rangers were playing the Penguins, Crosby, had that concussion, or what I believe was a concussion. They labeled it an upper body injury, but, he got hit in the head and, had to miss the rest of that game and then the next game. And it's like, man, I want Crosby to be out there. I don't want anybody to get hurt. And I don't want this to be cheapened or lessened because, people can point and say, well, Crosby wasn't out there. And it is funny to see Penguin fans, voice their opinion that, it's only, you guys only beat us because Crosby got hurt. It's like, listen, that series, there were 25 periods of hockey played. When you consider, all 7 games plus the 4 overtime periods that were played, Sidney Crosby was on the ice for 21 of those 25 periods. You know what? I'm sorry. You got to figure out a way to overcome that. And again, I don't celebrate the fact that he gets hurt. I hate to see anybody get hurt, but come on now. Let's not point to that. The Rangers had some injuries in that series too, most notably Ryan Lindgren. And look, I'll admit part of the fact that I put this at number 1, it is the fact that the Penguins have been very successful in recent years. And for anybody, that wants the Islanders here, the Islanders haven't done anything since the 80s. I mean, they had 2 fairly deep runs in somewhat recent seasons, but the Penguins have won 3 Stanley Cups in the Crosby era. And yeah, there is some jealousy there. I'd like to see the Rangers one day skating around either in Madison Square Garden or some away rink holding the Stanley Cup over their heads. That'd be nice to see. Unless you're 83 years old, you've only seen at maximum 1 Stanley Cup win for the New York Rangers in your lifetime. And we're getting to the point where nobody under the age of 30 will have even been alive the last time that the Rangers won a Stanley Cup, which is a pretty depressing thought when you really break it down. But yeah, I mean, just it's got a nice mix of being an old school rivalry and also a modern day rivalry. The Penguins knocked the Rangers out of the playoffs in 1989, 1992, and 1996. The 92 series in particular was a disaster. Rangers won the President's Trophy that year, but it didn't matter. They got up 2 games to 1 in that series, lost 3 straight, got knocked out by the Penguins. And, the series in, what year would that have been now? 2014, when the Rangers fell behind 3 games to 1 to the Penguins. Going into that series, I really felt like this was the Rangers' time. I'm tired of seeing the Rangers lose to this team. I thought the Penguins were kind of vulnerable that year. I didn't think it was one of the, I mean, obviously, the core was in place. You had Crosby, Malkin, and Letang and Fleury. But I thought that their supporting cast that season was not as good as it had been in other seasons and in seasons since then. I thought the Rangers had a deeper team, just a better team, and a team that was wired to win that series. And they fall behind 3-1 after a really tough showing in Game 4 in Madison Square Garden. And I was so down after that. I was like, they're going to lose this team again. They're going to get knocked out by the Penguins again. And then, of course, we have team rallying around Marty St. Louis after his mom passes away. So a very emotional story being told in that series as well. Rangers come back. They win Game 5 on the road. Game 6, the Mother's Day goal for Marty St. Louis. And then Game 7, just a really tense finish to that game. The Rangers hold off the Penguins 2-1 in that series. But, this rivalry lives on. You get the feeling watching Rangers-Penguins, 2 years ago especially, but certainly this past season as well. The players in these two teams just genuinely do not like each other. There is obvious animosity. There's obvious bad blood. There's obvious hard feelings. And it shows every single time these two teams take the ice against each other. And for all those reasons I just mentioned, to me, with all due respect to anybody else's opinion on what the best Ranger rivalry is, this, for me at least, is number one, Rangers and Penguins. And we'll see what happens this season as these two teams write their latest chapter. I'm sure something's going to go down. It always does with the Rangers and the Penguins. As far as worst moment in this rivalry for Ranger fans, I'm going to say losing in 5 games in the first round in 2016. I thought about 1992, but that was before I was into hockey and didn't really experience it as a fan. But for me, 2016 was tough. It was very one-sided. Rangers went down in 5 games. Rangers won Game 2 in Pittsburgh, but they lost 3 games in a row after that. Lundqvist got injured in Game 1. Ronta ended up playing in 3 games in this series in relief of Lundqvist. I don't think Lundqvist was ever 100% after that happened. And this was also getting toward the end of this era of Ranger hockey. They kept this team together for another season after this, but that's when the rebuild happened and the Rangers started wheeling and dealing and basically just moving on from this core group that they had for so many years. And, obviously very bittersweet to, announce a rebuild like that. You understand that it's necessary, but it's also, sad because these guys are leaving and they're leaving without ever winning a Stanley Cup. And it kind of just pour oil on the fire. This was the first round, and the Penguins went on to win the Stanley Cup that season. So it basically just sucked on every level imaginable. As far as the best moment in this series, I thought about giving it to Panarin, Game 7 this past year. Again, another 3-1 comeback for the Rangers against the Penguins, knocking them out of the playoffs. And the Rangers, of course, going on to play in the Eastern Conference Final that season. But I'm actually going to go back to 2014, which I mentioned just a second ago, to that 3-1 series comeback. That's a great joke, by the way. Just say, hey, you remember that time the Rangers came back from 3-1 down against the Penguins? No, not that time, the other time. It's happened twice in just a decade. Pretty wild. But yeah, Rangers in that series in 2014, they win Game 1 on the road in overtime, lose 3 in a row. And then, of course, they come back. They come storming back. So to me, watching the clock run out in Game 7 of the third period with the Rangers winning 2-1 against the Pittsburgh Penguins to win that series, that takes the cake. That clock could not possibly move any slower. That's how it is in the Stanley Cup playoffs. When you've got a lead, it just crawls. And when your team is trailing, it looks like the clock is in warp speed. That's just the way that it goes. But yeah, seeing that clock hit 0 and seeing the Rangers celebrate and mob Henrik Lundqvist and to do it in Pittsburgh, I think that kind of adds to it as well because that place just went silent. Every single Penguin fan thought that series was over and there's no chance the Rangers were coming back. So that's number 1 for me. And Marty St. Louis, I mentioned him a minute ago. He got the primary assist on the game winner in Game 7, getting it to Brad Richards, who scored to give the Rangers a 2-1 lead. And that, of course, was the final score as well. So the Rangers eliminate the Penguins. And again, for my money, Rangers-Penguins, best rivalry that the Blue Shirts currently have. I figure we could pretty much call it there for today. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, it is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time.